Hello and happy April Fool's Day Friday. Thanks for tuning in to radiofreerhinecliff.org. And this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight with, wait for it, according to her, self-diagnosed control freak who continues to learn the hard way the only things she knows how to be true, that control is a lie and illusion and love will save your life. Lydia Slaby.
Wow.
So good. I picked that out because it's just so beautiful. And I read your book, which I'm holding here. If everybody at home can take a look, I'll hold it up in front of the microphone. The book called Wait, It Gets Worse. And it's a memoir.
It is.
And I don't really care for memoirs.
Okay, that's fair.
And this thing is amazing. It's so, so good. I've had so much fun reading it. Not least is you're a good writer.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
And you really have some nice sentences and some beautiful phrases in there.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Are you now a convert to memoirs or just mine?
I doubt it.
Okay.
Probably just yours.
Fair enough.
And I've read probably 7/8 of it. I skipped ahead to read the end before you came in tonight. But it tells a tale. It tells a number of tales. Would you share with the people at home what?
Sure. Yes, overlapping tales. I have a really quite extraordinary love story with my husband. And that love story kind of collided dramatically with a cancer diagnosis when I was 33. And then the process of recovering, not just from cancer, but chemotherapy, and how to patch together a relationship that had to go through that. And navigate the career that I was having at the time, which was intense, to say the least. And how to, be an adult in your 30s.
Right.
So it's all of it together. And what I realized as I was writing the book is that it ultimately talked about how the only constant, this is going to sound super trite, but the only constant in our lives is change.
Right.
And it is the one thing that we are not taught. Like, nobody goes and tells kindergartners how to handle the fact that life is wildly unpredictable and is going to throw curveballs at you. And so, what do we do?
Right. Though I guess kindergartners get that from events in their lives and things
they do.
change.
But, I learned how to handle change by just locking down and becoming an absolute control freak, which is not the way I recommend the best way to handle it.
So that's how you learned to handle change, was by locking down and becoming an absolute control freak.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a very clever way to handle change.
Nope.
But did it work for a while?
Totally. It worked right up until it failed.
How does that work? Because it seems sort of that it wouldn't.
Well, it seems like it wouldn't, right? But if you're sick, as a kid, I was always sick. And so what I did is I became an athlete and I became strong. I was always a little uncertain about my academic credentials, and I was always a little And so what did I do? I worked really hard and I went to the best schools. I went into the best careers. I worked so hard to just make my life work the way I thought it was supposed to work. And it wasn't until I tried to apply that same theory to recovery from cancer that, literally all hell broke loose.
Right.
And I almost died. And suddenly I realized that perhaps having a vice-like control over my life was not how I was going to actually thrive.
Right. So how long ago was that cancer diagnosis?
I'm 43, so it was almost 10 years ago. I was on June 28th, 2012.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you were this, locked down control freak.
Yep.
And then cancer came into your life. What do you think your life would look like had cancer not come into your life? Would you still be?
I'd be divorced.
Right.
I'd probably be a partner in a law firm, in a really good law firm, because, I didn't tolerate anything else than that. I'd probably still be in Chicago, maybe New York, maybe London. I have no idea. I'd be drinking a lot more.
Which is a perfect segue to the show. A tradition of the show is the guest brings a cocktail for us to enjoy. And I'm just going to shame you.
Sorry. I'm so
Lydia
sorry.
did not.
I did not. I should have brought you a perfect Manhattan. That is my drink.
That's my drink. It's a fabulous drink.
Oh.
Well, I'll take a rain check if that's okay.
Yes, my favorite bourbon is Larceny. And you got to get the proportions of the vermouth, the sweet and the dry, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a drink show coming on after this one on radiofreerhinecliff.org, and they'll be serving perfect Manhattan. So if you can stick around, we'll do that.
Enjoy that.
So in a way, you must look back and think, thank God for the cancer. It got you off of this path.
Yeah.
And when you imagine yourself on that path, how do you imagine your emotional state?
Oh, if I hadn't?
If you hadn't had...
Oh, wow. Oh, I'd be miserable.
Right.
I'd have really good clothing and I'd be miserable.
Really super nice shoes.
Oh my gosh, so many shoes. So many.
Now I'm looking at your shoes. You're wearing Blundstones.
I know, right? Like
solid.
That haven't been polished in 6 years.
Yeah. So you started... Tell about the diagnosis.
So what had been happening is for the 2 months before I was diagnosed, I'd been losing weight, which I was very proud of.
Right.
And I was losing my breath. So I've always been an athlete. And it got to the point where I stopped being able to run 2 miles. I stopped being able to run 1 mile. And then the day before I was diagnosed with cancer, I couldn't jog across the street. And I was with a friend of mine from work, and he looked at me and he was like, "You're in better shape than this." And I was like, "Theoretically, but I don't know." And he said, "Please tell me you're going to go see a doctor." But the problem is at the same time, my personal life was in such absolute chaos that I just thought I was stressed. And also I was working as, a white collar litigator for a corporate bankruptcy group in Chicago, right? So
Right.
like life was full of stress. And my body literally fell apart. A really good friend of mine a few months ago, she met me for the first time when I was in that 2 month period of losing all this weight. And she was like, "You were 2-dimensional. Just so you know, you were 2-dimensional." And I was like, "Really? Huh."
That doesn't sound very good.
No.
Because you were so thin.
Yeah, I was so thin. So I've always been slender. And I mean, I'm slender now. I was 20 pounds less than I weigh right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Egads.
Yeah.
So how did you end up getting to Chicago?
Chicago, I ended up at Chicago. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went to college in Providence, Rhode Island. I spent a year after college back in D.C., and then I moved to Boston for a really fascinating set of jobs, mostly with the state of Massachusetts. And then I moved to Chicago because I was getting my graduate degree from Northwestern.
Right.
I went there for my JD MBA.
So for those who didn't read your resume as I did, I mean, it's really impressive.
Thank you.
You went from this fabulous school in D.C. to Brown.
Yep.
Which is evidently not so easy to get into.
Yeah, it's going to.
And then Harvard for a spell, and then Northwestern.
Yep.
And what am I forgetting? Something else in there?
Is there another one in there? I don't think there's another one in there.
Well, yeah.
My sister went to Stanford. Does that count?
Yeah, sure it does.
Okay, great.
And your sister, so the diagnosis, you went in to get this diagnosis. You went to see the doctor because you couldn't cross the street.
Yep.
And
she was great. She's one of the best doctors I've ever had, and I will always have her in a special part in my heart because she listened to what was going on in my chest, and she said, "Okay, I need to get you into the hospital." And I was like, "I'm sorry, you need to do what?" And she said, "Yeah, you need to go get something, a heart scan where they actually look at your whole heart." I forget what it's called. And I was like, "Okay." And I was like putting stuff in my bag, and I was like, "Great. So I'll see you like next week." And she was like, No. You're going to stay in my waiting room until I get you the appointment across the street. You're not leaving."
right.
And I was like, "Oh, that sounds frightening."
Egads.
And so what the cardiologist saw in that later appointment was my heart. So your heart is held in something called the pericardial sac, with just a little bit of fluid so that your heart can beat without chafing against the things that surround it. And that pericardial sac was filled with almost a liter of fluid. So a lot more than it's supposed to have. And every time my heart beat, my right ventricle would collapse under the weight of the fluid. So that's what the cardiologist saw. And it was late on a Thursday afternoon. It was too late for him to admit me to the hospital, so he sent me down to the ER for the ER to admit me to the hospital. And Northwestern has, it's a trauma 1 ER. So imagine all the things that happen at a trauma 1 ER. And the team there, they were fascinated by me because I wasn't obvious. I wasn't a gunshot victim. I wasn't, I wasn't obvious. And so they got to flex their diagnosis muscles. And so, well, first I had a chest x-ray. And I was like, I just did that. And they were like, I don't care. And then, and then I had a CAT scan. And then I was diagnosed with lymphoma in the ER at around 10 o'clock at night.
On that Thursday?
That Thursday. It was a very busy day.
And what was the date of that?
June 28, 2012. It was the same day that actually the Supreme Court upheld the first Obamacare decision.
Nice.
Yeah.
June 22. So you're coming up on the 10-year anniversary.
I am.
You have anything special planned?
No. It's also my half birthday, June 28th.
Is it? Well, happy belated birthday, I guess.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Yeah.
Well, so they found a tumor. It wasn't quite the size of a grape. It was...
Yeah, it was about the size of a grapefruit.
Yeah.
And it was sitting basically on top of my heart. So if anybody knows where your thymus is, which was an organ that I'd never even heard of, it was surrounding my thymus. It was behind my sternum and on top of my heart and like elbowing both of my lungs. And it was about the size of a grapefruit.
Right. And during the preceding 2 months, it had just been getting bigger and bigger.
Bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, I asked my oncologist at one point how long she thought it had been growing, and she said probably about 8 months. But when a tumor is there, it gets noisy really fast, right? Because there's your heart and there's your aorta and there's your lungs, and there's not a lot of space for a grapefruit-sized tumor to show up and not get noisy. Because sometimes, actually, if you have tumors in your belly or whatever, they can be the size of a basketball before anybody notices them.
Right.
But yeah, and most of the growth happened probably in the last 2 months. Tumors like the one I had grow very, very quickly to the point where they actually kill off. They die from the inside out because they grow so quickly that they can't grow the blood vessels to support the inside of the tumor.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild.
Did not know that.
It's wild.
So they said you had cancer. Did they say what kind of cancer? I forget.
They said it was lymphoma.
Okay.
Yep. And it took them a couple of days to really firm up what kind of lymphoma.
What kind?
It was non-Hodgkin's. It was a form of non-Hodgkin's. It was large B cell.
Right.
Primarily found in the mediastinum. It's actually a very common form of cancer for people that age.
And when they told you lymphoma, you'd heard that word before because...
I had, because in 2006, my sister had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Yeah. My older sister, she's 25 months older than I am.
And how is she doing now?
2008, whatever. She's had a more difficult process with it than I have. She actually just came out of New York Presbyterian with her second bone marrow transplant about a month ago.
Okay. Knocking on wood.
But she is currently cancer-free, which is the second time she's gotten that news in the 14, 15 years that we've been doing this dance with her.
Gads.
Yeah.
And she lives around here somewhere.
She does. Right? Yep. She lives up near Milan. She's on 308, right near the fork in the road. She's the reason why we moved here, actually.
Well, I remember reading that in the book.
I know, right?
And so you, at some point in the book, you came here to help her out.
Yep. They bought a little farm and built a house and all the rest of it. And yeah, as part of right before I was going back to work from chemo, I came out to visit her, yeah. And I helped her chop a bunch of wood, which was hilarious because both of us were recovering from chemo at the time, and nobody should have been holding an axe.
It was a great section of the book, though, and it made a lot of sense. You were dealing with all this stress and all this sort of intellectual stress, and you came out here to both be with your sister, help your sister, and just do this physical labor.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was lovely. And just being here, this is half the reason why my husband and I live here now.
And how long have you and your husband been here?
We moved out in September of 2018.
Okay.
So 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. That math sounds right. Yeah.
And what I didn't say in your introduction is that you're also a village trustee.
I am, for the fair village of Rhinebeck.
Yeah. How's that going? How long have you been a village trustee?
I was appointed to a midterm vacancy in October of 2020.
Okay.
So I've been a trustee now for 1.5 years.
And when is that term up?
I ran in the spring of 2021, and
Okay.
I will run again. Well, my term is up next spring, 2023.
Okay, so it's a 2-year term?
It's a 2-year term.
And
Exhausting. Everybody's always running.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a nuisance.
Yeah.
Well, how is that? Are you enjoying that?
I am enjoying it. It's fascinating. It's fun. It's a way that I feel like I can use my skills, which are not insignificant, to help this village that I really love. And there was a need for it, you know?
Right, and your skills, I've got like 5 pages of notes. Lydia's like, well, lots of notes. I'm like, well, 3 of them are your resume, which is so impressive. Your skills, like you studied at Brown Urban Studies with honors at Harvard, urban design. Mm-hmm. So you do have some chops. You do have some good experience and some good book learning, I guess, and all of this stuff.
I do, yeah.
As the village tries to do different things, like they have a comprehensive plan they're working on.
Yep, that's my fault. I apologize for that one. But yes, we hadn't. The village hasn't updated its comprehensive plan since 1993. So I encouraged the village to perhaps get a move on that. And so now we have a comprehensive plan committee, and it's just getting up and running in the last couple of months.
That's great.
Yeah.
And is there sort of a best practices for how often a village should update their comprehensive plan?
More than once every 30 years.
Okay. Good. So that seems like it's going to make a lot of people happy and a lot of people unhappy.
Yep.
As most
without a doubt
changes do.
Yep.
What are the things likely to be most popular with the largest percentage of people?
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Poof. Well, we're thinking a lot about the cost of housing in the area, which has become especially concerning since the pandemic. We're thinking a lot about the design of downtown Rhinebeck, trying to make it more walkable, bikeable, sort of pedestrian friendly. We're going to be thinking about, as a part and parcel of that, what to do with the number of cars that have been coming to Rhinebeck.
Yeah.
There's some, easy updates to the zoning code that just need to be addressed, but people tend not to get excited about that.
So what kinds of things can any village do to make their downtown more walkable and bikeable?
Usually widened sidewalks is a great way to start.
Does Rhinebeck have space for that?
It depends, right? We have plenty of space depending on what we want to do with parked cars.
Which is another problem.
Right. So we have kind of a bit of a conflict at the moment of people want to be able to drive into the village, park in front of the store where they want to go, pop out of their car, go into the store where they want to go, get back in their car, and then leave. And so if we remove parking from in front of any of the stores downtown, that's problematic for some people.
Yeah.
But if we continue to have the sidewalks be fairly narrow, then, even now without tables on the sidewalks, and we ran that experiment for a couple of years, which was fun and informative, we have bicycles and we have dogs and we have strollers and so as more and more people use the walking areas of the village, it is becoming more clear that everything needs a little bit of help, and everything needs a chance to evolve and change. So That's what we're going to be thinking about.
All of these things need a budget to implement them.
Oh, yes, they do.
So when you're doing this, do you sort of see problems? You're like, oh, yeah, I remember studying that in school.
Totally. Yeah. So I grew up, one of the wonderful things actually about the way that I grew up and my parents is I grew up in Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And my father bought a house there in like 1960 something when it was not cool to live on Capitol Hill. And I watched a historic neighborhood evolve from, I was born in the late 70s and I moved out in probably 2002. And, it was extraordinary to witness. And Capitol Hill has one of the most restrictive historic preservation commissions in the country, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so between that and what I did with urban studies at Brown and the neighborhood development work that I thought about when I was at Harvard, there's all sorts of things that you can do to make a downtown sort of small area really thriving. And it needs a mix of businesses. It needs a mix of residents. Diversity is truly the key. Diversity in interest, diversity in economics, diversity in, you can't have 6 Indian restaurants, right? Like you need, my husband and I joke that Rhinebeck is actually perfect because it has one of everything.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like this is actually how a small neighborhood or village functions beautifully is you have one of everything that you need. And Rhinebeck has done that for the most part. But, and I'm sure, but the trick now is how to handle the fact that all sorts of people have suddenly recognized that Rhinebeck is a really lovely place to hang out.
Right.
And that's where we are.
So you say almost one of everything. Are there any sort of glaring, absences, things that should be here but aren't?
Not that I can think of. No, but you always hear it of like someone being like, well, I really wish there was a place where like a normal person could buy underwear, and it's like, well, okay.
Rhinebeck department store.
Right, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. And that's sort of where I put, and they're like, well, so everybody has their own perspective on like what would be the perfect store that Rhinebeck is missing that they would use. Yeah. And,
And what were the things that Rhinebeck had that made you think, okay, we could live here? Sort of the essential things.
God, what wasn't here? So my family was here, which was primary number one. We have always lived in neighborhoods and cities where we could walk to a coffee shop. And so we made sure that when we first got here, we were renting a home, and we made sure it was in walking distance of Bread Alone, Samuel's. And that was sort of like really low bar, right?
Right.
Pretty low bar, but that was where we were. And then we discovered that we could walk to Sunflower. And then we discovered that we could walk to, the hamburger place and the pizza place and the best Indian food I've had in years.
Yeah.
And, if we wanted to stretch our legs a little bit, we could walk to the library on a beautiful day. And it's just this remarkable little ecosystem that really is supportive to the people who live here. That's why I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when will your proposal for the new comprehensive plan be done?
We have a very aggressive, lofty goal of having it presented to the Board of Trustees by next winter. So inside a year.
Okay. The Board of Trustees, and you're on that board.
I am on the board.
How many other members of that board are there?
There's 5 of us total. So there's 4 trustees and 1 mayor.
Right. So it gets presented to the Board of Trustees. When is the moment where the public gets to come and carp about how horrible it is?
Oh, they're going to be able to do that the entire time. Yeah, we're starting the process with a listening season. So spring is going to be our listening season. Summer is going to be an understanding season. Fall is going to be the making season. And the comprehensive plan committee is very clear, and they want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to be heard and comment at literally every step where we go.
Right.
And then obviously once the report is complete, the public will have all sorts of opportunities to tell us whether it's good or bad or fabulous or needs to be changed or however we want to do it. And then even once that's happened, once the Board of Trustees gets it, we'll hold a series of public hearings. So, there's no way that the Board of Trustees is going to vote on this thing without everybody being able to say whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah, which is super important.
It is, but bless you. Bless you for doing that. Because I can just imagine, what's likely to be in it that's going to upset the most amount of people?
I can't give it away. No, I have no idea because we don't know what's going to be in it yet. What I would like to see in it, personally, this is me speaking as a resident of the village and not as a member of the Board of Trustees, but I grew up where historic buildings that were out of compliance with the zoning code were allowed to be adaptively reused into something that would work for the zoning code. At the moment, the village of Rhinebeck does not have that. So we have a lot of large buildings in the historic district that some are grandfathered in as apartment houses. The Thompson House on Livingston is one of them. And then there's buildings that we're having this argument right now about the Father Brogan Center, the Buckley Schoolhouse, whatever you want to call it. And I think it would be a dreadful shame to have that building be torn down and not reused in some way that could benefit the community. I just think that would be a dreadful shame.
And would apartments count as benefiting the community?
I think apartments would count. I think a community center would count. I think village and town hall, village and town governments are outgrowing their buildings. And so even perhaps, a new municipal building and we convert, there's all sorts of needs for the community, right? We need apartments, we need municipal buildings, we need community centers.
Right.
And losing a building like that and just tearing it down and creating two more houses for people to buy at $2 million each would just seem to me a dreadful loss.
And does that building have any sort of historical value?
I mean, it doesn't, right? I mean, right. It is a former school building from the 1930s.
Yeah.
I met a few people who actually went to school there and they're like, it was like going to school in a prison. And that's, I don't want anyone to feel like they're living or working or, community centering in a prison. But, I think it's a beautiful building. I think it's different. I think the problem with some historic areas is that when you tear down the buildings that don't look like the rest of the community and then you start putting up new construction that looks Victorian or looks Queen Anne or looks whatever, then you start feeling like you're in the middle of Walt Disney World.
Right. I'm thinking of Mirbeau now.
That's a great example.
Say no more.
Say no more. And so what I would be concerned with is losing a building that makes the architecture diverse.
Right.
In favor for new construction that looks homogeneous. That I would find very concerning. Because it just makes, when you're walking and you're just looking around you, it's fun to have diversity of architecture.
Right.
And so this is also part of what we're thinking about with the comprehensive plan is what to do with the historic district. Because the state and the federal government expanded the village of Rhinebeck's historic district in early 2021. And they expanded both the footprint of the historic district as well as what qualifies to be a contributing building. And previously, it was buildings built prior to 1930. And now, according to the state and the feds, it's buildings, for the most part, built before 1970.
Wow.
So a lot of people look at that and they say, you're telling me that this split level from the 1960s is historic? And it's like, yeah, aesthetically, you may not like it, but historically, it is very relevant to the development of the village. Not everybody who lived in the village could afford the big fancy houses.
Right.
These were people who worked here.
So I was not aware of that. So you're telling me now, like a split level ranch on some street in the village couldn't be torn down and replaced with?
Well, right now, it theoretically could be, because the Village Historic District, as encompassed by the village zoning laws, has not changed to reflect what the federal and state governments did with the larger district. And so at the moment, we're living in two historic districts. We're living in what the village says is our historic district and what the zoning laws say there, and what the state and the federal government say is now our historic district.
Why did the state want to do that?
We asked them to. Okay. So village government, I think in 2017 or 18 or 19, I'm sorry, I should know this. We did we got a grant from the county. We did a huge report. And we worked with the state, and the state said, great, and turned it into a whole thing. So we have a wonderfully updated inventory of all of our buildings. And now the trick is we have to hold a bunch of, we have to make a decision on what we want to do, and we have to hold a bunch of public hearings about it. And, do we want to bring all of these new old buildings into the historic district?
And do you? Is there much of a taste for that amongst the trustees?
I have a taste for it.
Yeah.
For all of the reasons I just said.
Yeah.
And I know that there's other members of the Board of Trustees who also have a taste for it. And the question is whether the public has a taste for it. So we'll see.
Right. If I own an old split level ranch somewhere, your example, and all of a sudden it's in a historical building.
Yeah.
And I was going to tear it down and build something bigger. Yep. And now I can't.
Well, you can't without a really good reason.
Okay.
Yeah. Our historic demolition code, it's Chapter 64, our historic building code. I know, I'm sorry. It allows for historic demolition permits, but you just have to have a bunch of really good reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what constitutes a good reason for that?
Economic hardship. It can't be used in its current state. So if it's just too poorly maintained.
Okay.
If it's too expensive, there's sort of a series of them. It's ironic, actually, because I just went through this with my house. But I'm not tearing down my house. If we're not punitive about it, and there's only a handful of buildings in the Rhinebeck district that are individually listed, and so the rest of them are just contributing to an overall fabric and feel of a lovely historic community. And so, our demolition code and our rehab code and all of the rest of it, they're not wholly restrictive and wholly punitive. Mm-hmm. It's just, please be careful when you're thinking about this. Please consider that, this 1960s split level, not right now, but in the future, is actually a historic asset to the village. And if you want to tear it down and build a really huge house, why don't you consider doing that somewhere else?
Nice. I love that. So you mentioned Chapter 64, which had to do with all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that made me think, in the book, you were a lawyer.
I was a lawyer.
And it was all like citations and law and whatever, with numbers and...
Yep. Footnotes and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When's the last time you were a lawyer? Are you still?
I am still a lawyer. I am inactive. So in order to practice law, in order to actually give legal advice, you have to be a current member of a bar. I'm an inactive member of the Illinois State Bar.
Okay.
So, with a bunch of continuing legal education, I could re-up, but at the moment I'm uninterested.
And if you're licensed in Illinois, can you practice in New York?
No. New York has a very strict set of rules around who can waive in and who can't waive in, but yeah. So
would you have to take the bar exam here in New York?
Yes, because I practiced for 4.5 years. If I had practiced for 5, I could waive into New York, and if I was in good standing. But luckily, I don't have a huge desire to practice.
That was my next question.
Yeah, no. I love the education. I loved law school. I'm so weird that way. And I still use the education literally every day. But no, at the moment, I have no desire to practice.
And you use it every day working with the village or
working with the village, negotiating with my husband, negotiating with my 7-year-old niece, you know.
And were there actually
writing
classes in negotiation?
Yeah, classes in negotiations, classes in writing. Law school has a bunch of it teaches you how to think like a lawyer in a lot of different ways. But basically what law school mostly teaches you how to do is look at a problem from every single possible perspective. So it really stretches your mind out. It doesn't let you be dogmatically positioned anywhere because you can't. If you have a client that needs you to be nimble in a different way, you can't be dogmatically positioned.
Right.
Yeah.
But you said in the book, you talked about one case and you said you go back to the case law first. That's where you start. What is the law?
Right.
And how are you going to interpret that?
Yep.
So in that way, there's not a lot of wiggle room, or is there?
Well, you know, I mean, this is a thing. Like our legal system in this country, we have a constitution, we have a federal constitution, we have state constitutions, and then we have a whole bunch of laws that fell out of both of those documents. And say we're in New York, right? We're guided by the federal constitution, but we're also guided by the state constitution of New York. And then every single time a judge makes a decision and generates case law, it might go this way. It might go a little that way. It might go up. It might go down. Like, you're never quite sure. And so the trick of a good lawyer is you basically figure out what answer you want, and then you go and you find the case law to support it. If it's like blatantly in violation of the Constitution, like storming the Capitol on January 6th, then like that's clearly illegal, and that because that's unconstitutional.
Right.
But you know, usually if it's not quite so clear in the Constitution or in actual black letter law, you know, thou shalt not, then you know, there's always gray area.
Right.
There's always gray area.
I love that. Figure out what answer you want and this sort of like steer the case law towards that.
Yeah.
And so you left that and were brought into this whole other world, the world of medicine,
Yep.
where you couldn't really figure out the answer you wanted and steer anything towards that.
Nope. None of it.
And the book, which I'm just going to say again, it's called Wait, It Gets Worse, and everybody should read it because it's so delightful. It's largely about that, giving up that part of you that loved the, you know, steering anything towards anything. Mm-hmm. You called it being a control freak.
Yeah.
And learning to be happy with the uncertainties of your life.
Yeah. Or at least not in complete chaos over the uncertainties of my life. You know, like I've learned how to sort of be happy inside the flow, but I cannot even express how sometimes the flow is just, it's a ride. I mean, you know this. We all know this, right?
Yeah. But I don't think I was ever a control freak.
Oh, congratulations. I'm really
I don't know.
happy
Maybe I'm wrong. Oh, look at this. My friends.
Oh, you are. There's
wiggling their hands.
Bus
It
tracks
just sounds like
right over your
denial.
back.
Not just a river in Egypt. So you talk a lot about your emotional journey and your transformation, the word you use a lot, throughout all of this.
Yeah.
Was your husband on a similar path? Has he evolved? Because I tend to think of what you did as evolving. Yeah. And I'm wondering, did he evolve along with you in all of this?
He did in his own way. And most certainly the relationship had to evolve. You know, my husband has his own story to tell, and it's really quite something. But he's lived a lot in his life. And he had learned to roll with the punches before I learned to roll with the punches. And so a lot of what happened while I was sick is, I mean, he was beautifully supportive. I mean, just, you know, being sick with a diagnosis like that in a hospital, you know, it's just like you just need a human there who's with you, who loves you and will hold your hand. But he, I think what mostly came out of that for both of us was an appreciation that our relationship didn't have to look the way that we thought it had to look. There's a relationship therapist out there named Esther Perel, who's very popular.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. She wrote a book called Mating in Captivity, which is great. And she works mostly with couples who cheat and, you know, how they don't necessarily have to leave each other as a result of that. And she has this theory that the same two people can have multiple relationships, even if in the eyes of the law, their relationship remains exactly what it is. And so Michael and I learned to invite a flexibility into the way that we defined how we were going to be in relationship with each other. And I'm not saying that we suddenly got into an open relationship or anything like that, because we didn't. But it was just, how are we going to be? How are we going to be partners with each other? And we joke that we're actually on our 5th relationship with each other. And, yeah.
All right, well, let's go back to the first one. How did you guys meet?
We met in high school. We started dating when I was 16 and Michael was 17.
But you went to an all-girls school.
I did. I went to an all-girls school in Washington, D.C. It's called the National Cathedral School for Girls. And he went to the all-boys school, which was, on the other side of the Washington National Cathedral. And so, we got thrown into school dances and had some co-ed classes and things like that. But yeah, that's where we met.
And did you sort of have eyes for him? You're going to these dances where you're like, oh, who's that guy?
Well, I mean, he's 6 feet and blonde, and he was the captain of the soccer team, and he was really smart, and often he had the lead in the musical. So if you didn't notice him, then you didn't have your eyes open.
Right.
But no, I actually thought he was an arrogant piece of shit the first time I met him. But it evolved into a friendship. And, as these things do, that friendship evolved. And there we go.
But that's scary, a friendship evolving into a romance.
Super scary, especially when you're 16, 17, because, it's like you have no idea how to even handle any of the emotions associated with it. Yeah. And then, of course, we broke up when he went to college.
Right.
And then we didn't speak for 10 years.
When he went to college at Brown,
where
you later went to college.
I did later go to college.
And that was part of the not speaking stretch.
Yeah, it was part of the not speaking stretch.
Had to be kind of weird.
Good thing Brown has so many students.
How big is Brown?
The undergrad is 5,000 students.
That's not a lot.
It's not. We saw there was always like I'm going to turn right and he's going to turn left and we're just going to avoid that quad,
Yeah. Well, I really want to meet this guy. I mean, you asked me who I thought would play him because the book is a lot about the cancer. It's a lot about learning to live with uncertainty and not be a control freak. But it's really so romantic. It's about your relationship with this guy who sounds like a saint in the book. She's not rolling her eyes if you're listening at home, Michael.
I'm not.
It's ridiculously romantic how you all were on and off and on and off.
It is.
And then sort of went through this hell of cancer together.
Yeah.
And now you're more on.
Yeah, we are much more on.
It's so good.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah. All of it.
So can you describe how it is that you came to leave behind that need for certainty in the hospital?
It didn't actually happen in the hospital. So I was very lucky with my cancer journey. I was diagnosed in late June. I was done with chemotherapy by late October. And as far as my cancer journey was, I was complete at that point. But for a variety of reasons, I had to have a surgery to remove what remained of the tumor, which involved cracking open my chest and taking it out. And that happened a few months after I completed chemo. And then 5 months after that, I went back to work. And I didn't know how I had changed. I had changed, but I didn't know how. And my way of responding to that was by working really hard and by beating my body into submission. I was out of shape. I was, I was still recovering from chemotherapy and from basically open heart surgery without the heart part. And I was working out. I was working really hard at the office. And that started in the spring of 2013. And then by the summer of 2014, because, the wires that were wrapped around my sternum were bothering me and this, that, and the other. And I didn't want to have any memory of what had happened to me. And so I wanted to have it all fixed. I had the wires removed. And I don't know if you know this, but when they open up your sternum in order to play with your heart, they wrap up your sternum with wire to bring it back together. And they usually just leave the wire there because why would you ever remove the wire?
Well, forever.
Yeah, they just leave it forever. Titanium wire, it's fine. But no, because I'm me, I had to have the wire removed. And so I did that. And as a result of that, something happened. God knows what, really. And I started having all of the symptoms of when I had the cancer. I started losing my breath. Blah, 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 blah. So my oncologist freaked out and, chest x-rays and, one thing led to another. And it turns out that my pericardial sac was filling up with fluid again. It was like, what the So I had an outpatient procedure to pull out some of the fluid from the pericardial sac in order to see if there was cancer. As part of that outpatient procedure, they poked a hole in my heart, at which point I actually did have to have open heart surgery. And an outpatient procedure turned into, 10 weeks of open heart surgery recovery. And it was at that point when I was recovering from that surgery that I was like, I am doing something wrong in my life because this is bullshit. And that was when I really took a good hard look at how I'd been living my life. And I roped in all of the teachers. I started asking everybody for help. I mean, everybody.
And what did that look like? What were the questions? How did you request that?
My life is falling apart. How do I fix it?
Okay, that's a good one.
Literally, I just recovered from cancer and then I have unnecessary open heart surgery. What the hell do I do with my life? What do I do now? And so as a result of asking everyone I know, basically that question, a few people show up. And teachers show up when you need them, right?
Yeah.
And as long as you're paying attention and listening and willing to accept them into your life. And as a result, I found a remarkable therapist. I created a relationship with an indigenous medicine man. I laid off my body. I stopped being so hard on my body because I also learned that my body is the one and only partner that I will have for my entire life, and I should be nice to it.
Right.
And I wish it didn't take me open heart surgery to learn that, and I hope for everyone out there that it doesn't. And, I learned to meditate. I, took a different approach with yoga classes. All of it. I learned how, and this is a practice, right? You never really get it until probably after you're dead, but I learned how my brain and my body and my spirit are all trying to navigate this world on behalf of this little vessel called Lydia. And that my brain is not my friend. My body doesn't lie, and spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, you can only hear it if you're paying attention. So I just had to learn how to navigate those three voices. And I'm still learning. Some days are easier than others. So
you talk about spirit. You mentioned indigenous medicine man. Was that person helpful in tuning into your spirit?
Super, super helpful. Indigenous wisdom is really quite remarkable. It's very similar no matter what culture you're looking at its core. It's a lot about being present, being connected, paying attention to the earth and the land where you're standing. This is another reason, actually, why Michael and I moved out of the city and here, was because we needed to be more connected to the ground.
Right.
And, and then it just, yeah.
So how does one find an indigenous medicine man? You were living in Chicago at the time, I'm guessing.
Well, my friend, I call her Lily in the book. She basically, she's this remarkable woman in my life who I'm so lucky to have. she called me after my heart surgery and burst into tears on the phone. And she was like, your life is ridiculous. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. And she was like, okay, you're going to New Mexico. And I said, I'm sorry, I just had heart surgery. And she was like, yeah, you're going to look like shit. Like, get your little wheelie and like look like crap and have like an open V-neck shirt so people can see your scar and your wound. And, you know, it hadn't even healed. She was like, get very nice men to put your little suitcase above your head. And she was like, you're going to New Mexico. And so I, you know, when some people show up in your life, and I've been asking what I'm supposed to do when someone shows up and says, you go to New Mexico, I went to New Mexico.
Not the hallmark of a control freak. So by this point, you're...
At this point, I was just saying yes to like whatever anybody would tell me to do.
That's great.
And so I went to New Mexico, and this lovely man and his extraordinary wife, he's originally from Peru, but he'd been adopted by the Lakota people, and so he has indigenous heritage and training from the Andes, as well as indigenous spiritual heritage and training from the North American tribes. And he put me into a sweat lodge for 3 days in a row. And he said, okay, let's see what happens.
And you're like, yes. Okay.
I was like, absolutely. Why not? I still have no idea what happened, except that after the first time, my pain went away. And after the second time, I stopped crying, and I'd been crying for like 2 years,
right.
You know, but I had no idea why I was crying because, you know, control freaks don't cry. It was very embarrassing. And then after the third time, I got calm. And so afterwards I was like, well, that was something. And he was like, it was something. I said, what did you do? And he said, I just gave you access to what's always there.
So what do you think happened? All right, and I got a second a companion question, because you described your mom as sort of like a white-robed, laying on of hands healer.
Yes.
And here's this thing in the same general realm.
Yep.
Was she alive when you did that?
She is. She was, and she is.
And she is.
Yeah.
What did she? Let me rephrase the question. What did she think happened?
I've never really had a full conversation with her about it because she and I have a very different perspective about all of this stuff. She's a little more dogmatic than I am.
Okay.
And as you're beginning to figure out, I've turned into a person that's just like, sure, why not? Let's try it. Absolutely. And, you know, and her first question to me when I told her that I'd gone to a sweat lodge, she said, you do know that those kill people, right?
It's happened.
It totally has happened. And I was like, and I didn't know that at the time. You know, I now know more. But I was like, okay, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the experience I had there. And, you know, and it was, there was a little bit of we're not having the same conversation.
Right.
And so, you know, some mothers and daughters, right?
It happens with a lot of people's parents, I think, regardless of what gender they all are. That just not having the same conversation. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Because just on that superficial level, how you described her, it seemed like there
would be a lot there to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe some spiritual help there as well. Mm-hmm. And were you raised with a spiritual foundation? Were you raised religious or?
No. My mother was, before she sort of went white robed and hands on, she was a relapsed Catholic.
Okay.
My father was raised by a scientist who was very much an atheist. So I was raised in the Church of WASP.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, we celebrated Christmas because one does.
Yeah.
And one goes out to brunch on Easter, you know,
right.
as one does.
Because in the book there are a couple, at least, of sort of typically religious themes. One of them is grace.
Yes.
Which you describe. I forget where it is, but you're here now. I don't have to find it in the book. How do you describe that?
I describe grace as the ability to be fully present and calm at any given moment. And in my first experience with grace, and this is when I talk about it, is when this is very early in my battle with cancer. I was in a great deal of pain. I don't know how many people have experienced this, but they have those really irritating charts in the hospital with like a smiley face on one end and a face in complete agony at the other end. And it's like, where on this pain scale are you?
Right.
And I always underestimated because I'm a badass, right? But for the first time in my life, I was like fully at 10. Fully at 10. I was in so much pain I couldn't think my way. I couldn't see anywhere but the pain that I was in. And I noticed that when I actually let myself feel the pain that I was feeling, it got better. And like, I mean, I'm not saying it went down to a 1, it went down to maybe like a 9.75, but it gave me enough space to actually be able to breathe a little bit and be able to sort of open my eyes to something that wasn't agony. And that is what I call grace, is the ability to just be wherever we are.
Instead of sort of the internal monologue complaining about wherever we are.
Right, because this is what the brain does, right? It messes with you. It takes you out of the present. The brain can't function in the present. It can only function in the future, what will be, or in the past, what happened. If your brain is talking to you, by definition, you're not in the present. And so your body and your spirit are the only people who can be, or the only entity, whatevers, that can be talking if you're in the present.
Okay, that's awesome. I never thought of it like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Because your brain has to analyze, right? And it can't analyze what's going on in the moment because it's not in the moment, right? The minute that you start thinking about that present, then you're out of the present.
Yeah.
You're in the past because you're thinking about what just happened.
Yeah.
Again.
There you go. So good. So before the pandemic, I'm guessing you're not doing it so much now. You also were a motivational speaker.
So yeah.
And self-described change witch.
Oh, I love that people love that.
I didn't say I loved it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
but I do.
Okay, thank you. That actually happened when I was building my website, and I was like, what am I going to describe myself as? And it was one of those moments where it was like, you know what? F it. I'm just going to call myself what I want to call myself. So I call myself a change witch.
That's good.
Yeah, it works.
And will you do motivational speaking again?
I would love to. I have a beautiful talk. I have 2, one associated with the book and one that's separate.
And the one that's separate, what's that? What's the topic of that?
Well, it's similar. It's just not firmly rooted in, buy this book and this is what you'll read about inside this book, It's about kind of before, middle, and after of moments where you can choose to be different.
Right.
I would love to. I love speaking. I love engaging. I love helping people think about their lives in a different way. I'm a little busy at the moment with the village work, but I'm hoping that once the comprehensive plan work is over, that I might have a little bit more time to kind of go back to all of that. I miss writing. I haven't been writing a lot either. But. And
what are you writing now?
My father passed in September of 2020.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And there's also, I've started writing short stories, and I've discovered that I always have a character in my short story that is a remarkable masculine role. A calm, protective, sort of remarkable masculine role. And we don't have enough literature that shows healthy masculine.
Like 6 foot, blonde, captain of the soccer team, ridiculously smart. You're welcome, Michael. And that brings us to the end of the hour. It's zoomed by.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. My goodness, it's been an hour.
It's been Lydia Slaby, village trustee and author of the book Wait, It Gets Worse, which I'm just loving so much. I skipped ahead to the end. I still have like 20 or 30 pages in the middle, and I can't wait to finish them. And I know how it turned out, but I still want to read it because the writing's so delightful. Lydia, thanks for being here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Happy Friday.